Hi, everyone. Aloha kako. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Stephanie Hutch. I'm the co-chair of Women in AFCEA International. It's my pleasure to welcome you to AFCEA's Senior Cyber Leaders Panel, hosted by Women in AFCEA. Our supporting partners today for today's panel are Ciena Corporation and Increditech. They make it possible to bring this informative session to our community. So many thanks to Ciena and Increditech. As part of AFCEA's support to continuing education, this technical session has been approved to earn several continuing education credits, including one GIAC CPE, one CERT Nexus CEC, and several CompTIA CEUs. This discussion will last for 1.5 hours, and you must stay for the entire panel to receive your credits. Yes. Be sure to get your badge scanned in the back before leaving. You cannot come back and scan your badge later. Immediately following the panel, Women in AFCEA is hosting a reception starting at 5:15 p.m. Be sure to accept a drink ticket when exiting this panel, and you can use it at the reception. The reception is also sponsored by Ciena and Increditech, and we are very appreciative of their support. So Women in AFCEA is an initiative run at the AFCEA international level. There are 3 primary components that fall under Women in AFCEA. So we have the Women's Committee, which is focused on advocating for women in leadership roles at the executive committee and board of director levels, serving on technical panels such as this one, and supporting the Women's Appreciation Award, which is given out at West every year in San Diego. We have a task force, which is led by Tiffany Tong and Allegra Scott. This group is focused on women-focused community events and engagement events at the AFCEA international level. And then we have the Women Outreach Leaders, led by Jennifer Spencer, Colleen Dilley, and Brooke Iser, which is focused on women-focused events at the chapter level. I'd like to recognize 2 outstanding women in the local Hawaii chapter. First is Halia Hester, and she's serving as the Women Outreach Leader for the Hawaii chapter. Halia, can you wave? Thank you, Halia. I'd also like to recognize Linda Newton, who has been a steadfast advocate for women in national security through her leadership of the Hawaii chapter and efforts coordinating women's panels at TechNet. Thank you, Linda. So as mentioned, this event today would not be possible without our platinum sponsors, Increditech, in conjunction with Ciena Corporation. Thank you again for your support. I would, sure, I'd like to now welcome Ms. Karen Spencer, who oversees the public sector marketing practice at Ciena. Welcome, Karen, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce the moderator of the Senior Cyber Leaders Panel. Mi Chung is the Chief Infrastructure and Services Division and Technical Director at Defense Information Systems Agency Pacific, or DISA-PAC, where she ensures and enhances operational readiness of DISA enterprise infrastructure and services. Ms. Chung served as the Technical Director and Deputy Commander of the DISA-PAC Korea Field Office for 15 years, providing leadership and winning individual DoD CIO Award for outstanding achievement in IT and cybersecurity related fields. Prior to joining DISA, Ms. Chung was selected as a Naval Research Lab Edison Fellow candidate and has 2 U.S. patents based on her research project there. Ms. Chung holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the University of Maryland, a master's in electronics engineering with computer science as a minor from George Washington University, and has completed technical and leadership programs at National Defense University and George Washington University. Thank you, Ms. Chung, for loaning us your time and talent to moderate the Senior Cyber Leaders Panel. We are looking forward to a terrific discussion, and if I may, just give a really quick plug. Ciena is also really honored to sponsor a teacher grant program supporting STEM programs in K through 12. So if any of you know any teachers, STEM teachers, across the United States and DOTA schools. That can be found on the AFCEA website under the AFCEA educational program under teaching grants. So thank you very much. Enjoy.
Thank you, Stephanie, for the wonderful opening and introduction. And thank you for joining Women in AFCEA to discuss risk management challenges and opportunities. Today, we're very connected than ever before. I asked my friend Google approximately how many people are connected, and the Google responded back saying that there are 7.26 billion people with a smartphone. That is 91% of the world population. So being connected is great. However, it introduces risks. Today, throughout the keynote events and panel discussion, common expressions were used, such as increased collaboration, increased data sharing, increased interoperability, joint, combined, coalition environment. Each one of these imperatives increase risk. So today, what we want to discuss is how do we enable increased collaboration, data sharing, interoperability, joint, combined, coalition environment. And I think General Jacobson said it very well today when he said that we have to collectively buy down risk in this theater. So today, we have distinguished panel members here today to discuss how to manage risk. And I would like to introduce our panel members, and I'm very honored to do so. First of all, Rear Admiral Susan Breyer-Joyner. She is currently serving as the Deputy Director of Joint Staff and as a chair of the Joint All-Domain Command and Control, JASC2, cross-functional team. She brings a vast knowledge and experience through her tours in the high North and Norwegian seas, Mediterranean and Arabian seas, Western and Southern Pacific Ocean, and in Iraq during the operations Enduring Freedom and Iraq Freedom and Tomodachi. She also had fleet assignments on USS George Washington, USS Blue Ridge, and USS Harry Truman. And if you look at her nameplate, she is the Joint Staff. So we're very honored to have the Joint Staff present. Ms. Lauren Knaussenberger, she is currently serving as the Chief Information Officer for the Department of the Air Force, which includes both the U.S. Air Force and Space Force. She brings a wealth of knowledge and experience from her previous job as Chief Transformation Officer and the Director of Cyberspace Innovation, and as an entrepreneur and venture capitalist and various other positions in the private sector. We also have Ms. Julian Vida. She is currently serving as the Chief Technical Advisor of the Public Sector of Splunk Incorporation. Splunk is a software platform to search, analyze, and visualize machine-generated data collected from many IT infrastructure and business of an organization. She is not foreign to the DoD environment, however, because she served honorably for 24 years in the U.S. Navy as a surface warfare officer and as a naval aviator. But fun fact for Ms. Vida is that she is a former champion of 2 television game shows, The Weakest Link and The Wheel of Fortune. Unfortunately, that was like a decade or so ago, so she cannot share the profit with us, but we'll let that go. And then finally, we have Dr. Mary Smith, who is currently serving as an assistant professor of computer science at Hawaii Pacific University. She has more than 25 years of information systems profession in educating and raising next generation of IT and computer professionals, but she also provides technical consulting and solution to business, government, and to individual clients. Her experience is vast in the academia community, such as St. Edward's University, Concordia University, and even University of Virginia. So just to ease into the hard questions today, I have an icebreaker question for the panel members. Yesterday was a Halloween. So the question we have is, what was your best costume that you wore as a child or as an adult, and why did you choose that costume?
So when she shared this question a little bit earlier, it's assuming that we've ever dressed up as an adult, and I honestly cannot remember, so I will default to childhood. Growing up, my mother was Japanese, but she came over obviously before I was born, well, not obviously, before I was born, and she did her best to, acclimatize to being an American. She did not speak Japanese growing up. We did not eat Japanese growing up. And so one of my fondest memories, though, is when I had the full Japanese kimono and all the accoutrements dressed up as a little Japanese girl wandering the streets of Florida. So it's very special to me.
So our stories are more similar than I thought they would be. So I have 2 little kids, and I don't know, when I dress up, it's usually the devil because that's an easy one to pull out of, my closet. But I was just in the Pacific last month, and my newly turned 9-year-old is obsessed with everything Japanese. Anime, Nintendo, sushi, favorite food. And so naturally, when I ask her, what do you want me to bring back for you from Japan, she says, a kimono. And I actually found a nice kimono, and the next thing I know, it is her Halloween costume. And my husband has looked up online geisha and is putting makeup on this child. And it actually looked pretty cool. And then she pulled out her pirate sword from last Halloween so that she could be a geisha with a sword. Because all princesses have swords. You can look good, but you need to fight. But I was on the plane on my way here on Halloween, so I missed trick-or-treating. But one of my mom friends texted to say, my daughter asked your daughter if she was Chinese. And your daughter responded, China is my enemy. And I was wondering, like, oh, what's she going to say next? She said, oh, these kids in D.C. So...
Good one. That's a good one. I'm going to go with one when I was a child. Another fun fact, I'm an identical twin, and my mom used to make our costumes back in the day when people used sewing machines and whatnot. And I don't really remember this, but I remember from photos, my mom made us sugar and spice one year. So we had like the box, you stick your head through whatever box your parents could find, and made it look like spice and, little McCormick shakers, and super cute. Oh, I was sugar because my sister is the evil twin and I'm the good twin.
Well, I love this question because, I love this question because I love Halloween as a child and as an adult. So I'm thinking of an adult costume. A few years ago, some friends said, let's go out, and I said, okay, but I didn't have a costume really available. And then I was thinking, I could be a bunch of grapes because I had a black shirt and a black pair of pants, and then I went out and got some purple balloons and blew them up, taped them to all parts of my body, and brought the bag with me just in case somebody popped one of the grapes, and I was set for the evening, and that was one of my favorite and most resourceful costumes. Yeah.
Thank you. So now we're going to go down and start asking some hard questions. But before we start, request every one of you to submit your question. Email your questions to the email address displayed, because after the first question that we're going to ask the panel members, we're going to start answering some of your questions. So the first question to the panel member is, what does risk management mean to you?
Thank you. I love this question. So risk management, I've been working in IT almost my entire career, and people go a certain way. But for me, risk management is about how we get to yes and getting the mission done, right? At the end of the day, cybersecurity, risk management, it's not about saying no. It's how do we get to yes? How do we make sure that the mission gets accomplished securely and safely. And when I talk about that, it's important to understand that risk management is not static, and I mean that in a couple of different ways. First of all, when you look at risk management, and it's human nature to say, oh, I did risk management, I'm done, I don't have to deal with this again until next year or 3 years from now or whenever. But the environment is changing constantly. And if we are not managing risk constantly across the enterprise, the adversary gets a vote, our configuration management gets a vote, and our vendors get a vote. Because at the end of the day, and when we talk about risk management, it's about all of the components that comprise our warfighting capability. It's not just about the networks. That's the first instance of static that I'm talking about. The second instance of static that I'm talking about, I have just blanked on, so give me a minute. Oh, it's temporal, right? Because what is acceptable risk when the decisions and the data has to be consumed in milliseconds is a different type of risk than if the data has to be preserved for years, right? And so when we talk about risk management, it's also along that spectrum of time. How long must I make sure that an objective can be achieved? And that's why risk management is so incredibly hard. The scope, the continuousness, continuity of it is critical. And then one final piece, what's the appetite? What's the risk? Who owns the risk? And what's their level of tolerance? I heard mentioned a little bit earlier, Bob Stevenson and I have known each other years, but when he says, oh, the Air Force does a good job at assessing risk, I'm going to trust them. I love him, but I don't know what the Air Force's risk tolerance was.
We are really good.
Right? Was what their risk tolerance was when they made that decision. And that matters because every environment is not the same. The data is not the same. And so how are we accepting risk? How are we assessing risk? And these are all of the questions that as technology has come along, the things that we used to do manually, we can now automate to a certain extent. We can do it faster. But we have to be able to quantify to a certain extent what we're making the decisions on. And I think that's the most important part of risk management for me, is being able to articulate to my commander or whoever owns the risk at the moment, here's the threat, and here's why I think it is or is not acceptable in order to achieve the objective that you have laid out. Because there are second and third order consequences, and again, it goes to time. And so for me, I love this question. I think we're going to have excellent discussions, and I look forward to hearing about what risk management means to my other esteemed panel members.
All right. I'm going to be a little more philosophical for a moment and go back to, I think it was 2017 that I joined this great institution intending to just stick around for a couple years as an HQE in charge of transformation, the Chief Transformation Officer for the Air Force at the time. And one of the first things that people told me about being in the Department of Defense is that everyone is so risk averse, and that it would be so difficult to do anything new because we were so risk averse. And I ran around for the first 90 days, just, learning things, assessing, interviewing people, asking crazy questions that probably, other folks had asked many times before that, and maybe scratching my head a little bit more so just because I hadn't heard the answer 20 times already. And then I remember meeting with the Defense Innovation Board, and I was sitting there. We had a great board. We still do. Milo Medine, Eric Schmidt, and Neil deGrasse Tyson were sitting there, and they're like, hey, you know, you're one of the newest folks in. What do you think about this risk aversion in DoD? And I was like, you know, honestly, I don't think DoD is risk averse at all. What DoD doesn't want to do is try new things. We are taking stupid risks every day. We take absolutely crazy risks that I do not understand at all because we put unreasonable litmus tests to try new things. We are very uncomfortable with trying new things. We don't know how to assess new things. But that doesn't mean that it's riskier to do the new thing than it is to do the thing that we're doing. We know full well that that system right there is full of Swiss cheese. This is inherently more secure. I can test that and prove it to you in 2 weeks with the red team. This seems like a no-brainer. These are the types of discussions that we have over and over again. What's more important? My ability to fly tonight and fight and win and know that the operational commander and the pilots and the operators know what's at stake. They've flown this mission a few times. We're not going to let something maybe that's not as important as the mission get in the way. But it all has to come into the calculus. I remember after having that conversation, Milo Medine kind of taking my statement on the board and then saying, you know what, that's right. We are not taking risk in the test range. And as a result, we are pushing the risk to the warfighter. And I thought that was a much more eloquent way to put it. And then I heard Gwen Shotwell speak at AFA that same year. And she talked about, someone asked her a question about risk, and DoD's risk averse, and are you guys risk averse, and what do you think about failure? And she started with, failure is not an option. They said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? SpaceX, you guys are so innovative, you take risk. She said, yeah, we take lots of risk on the test range. We'll blow up a dozen rockets on the test range. But when it's time for mission go, failure is not an option. And so I think that we equate sometimes the two things as the same, and they are not. And I think that as a department, we're actually, a lot more people, I think, are thinking this way. I loved hearing General Jacobson this morning. You know, he clearly gets it. He clearly understands the importance of the capabilities, of also the cybersecurity of the capabilities. It also heartens me that we actually have more commanders understanding both the risk of something being not cyber secure enough for the mission, and how does that impact the mission? Because as much as we hate to say, oh, cyber accreditation, it stinks, there are some parts of it that are pretty important. When we do it smartly, we have to know, how do we know the system is secure? We don't have to go through a 900-item checklist to know that, but we need some way to understand how secure our systems are. That is a key element for an operation. We don't, we need to know, what are we emitting on this operation? Are my messages going to be intercepted on this operation? Our commanders are taking that into the overall risk calculation more than they ever have before. And that has been, that's been really interesting to see too. We also have more folks looking at, okay, I understand the risks of doing this. What are the risks of not doing this? How about we flip that over? And I'm hearing more in our dialogue people saying things like, well, what happens if we don't do that? And so really, I think that we try to put risk management into a box sometimes and assume that we mean one prescriptive thing. To me, risk management is looking at the whole of what I need to accomplish and making sure that the risk of acting does not outweigh the risk of not acting. But a lot of times we just have to act faster. And a lot of times making a decision, understanding, is it a one-way door or a two-way door? I think that's a good Bezos quote. Is this something that I can go try and I can come back? Or is this something that once I try, I burn the bridge and I can't? And we have to also understand that when we're making a decision, which kind of decision is it? What kind of risk is it? Is it a recoverable risk? Is it unrecoverable risk? And what am I risking? Am I risking lives? Am I risking a compliance issue? Does that compliance issue do something to my mission?
So I had an answer all set to go, and now I'm listening to the other discussion points that are coming up, and I'll start with this. So I reached out to at Splunk, we have a global intelligence team. A lot of companies have these teams that go out and identify risks to make decisions about where we put our assets, where we invest our money. And so for them, here's just the quick definition. It's identifying threats, communicating them effectively to decision makers, to keep people safe and keep the business running. And this helps us make investments, mitigate risk, and respond to residual risk that we can't avoid. Okay, a lot of words, but I like to talk in stories and make analogies that everyone can relate to. So I think of, this is what we all do with our own lives every day. We're all thinking about how we spend our time, where we spend our money, where we buy our house, and all of that is risk mitigation. And I think the department falls down when I think, like Lauren, you mentioned this, falls down a little bit when they look at technology risk mitigation or risk management as different than any other kind of risk management. And it isn't. It's the same. You learn, you gather intelligence, you figure out what the risks and opportunities are there, you make trades. You can't stop. To your point, Admiral, you can't keep from moving towards the mission, but you've got to look at what you're handed and just make the best decision. And I love, Lauren, that you said you don't think that the department is risk averse in the way that you couched it, and you're absolutely right. The department makes risks every day. It's just, you question why they took that one and not another one. But I still have to say, I feel that the department is still so stuck in its ability to take risks and do things in an innovative way that literally processes that exist 10 years ago or problems that exist 10 years ago exist today. For those of us who have been coming to these conferences for a long time, we hear the same stuff. For anyone here that was associated with the Navy, we used to have, about 10 years ago, we had this organization called Task Force Cyber Awakening. I was on that, and I didn't name it. Don't blame me, people don't like it. But it was because a nation-state actor got into NMCI, got into the largest enterprise network at the time, and we set up a task force, and we had all these senior executives, and we had all these admirals and these generals and all this money, and very little got done because it was just, let's talk about it some more. Let's talk about, the policies that we need to change and all that, and there was really not a lot of progress, I think. That's because of the risk management. Got stuck in the process, and there wasn't enough forward motion. So there's another thing I want to remind us all. I think we've all heard this throughout our lives. No risk, no reward. So sure, you could look at the risk, and you can say all day long, too dangerous, too risky, not going to do it, not going to do it, but then the reward isn't going to come. And we all know our adversaries aren't waiting for us to come up with a great solution. So keep the innovative ideas coming. Keep the creative ideas coming. Across the services, within the services. We've got to get beyond this this mindset where risk management has just become an anchor that keeps us from moving forward in a lot of ways. Or an excuse. Yes. Thank you.
I usually think of things, how I would explain it to my students. And before talking about risk management, whether it's a software engineering class or whether it's a computer programming class or capstone class, I first talk about knowing your objective. What are you trying to accomplish? And we use a very simple one. How do you get to class on time? Which could be important to them and also very nice to me. So I have them go through the risk management process as far as knowing your objective, jotting it down, focusing on that, identifying the possible risks that could prevent them from getting to class on time or whatever the objective is. And then we might use a matrix to categorize, okay, how likely is a risk like traffic or construction, how likely may that occur? And of course, it's somewhat subjective, but they can do a little research and find out what's going on in the construction on the roads, as well as what's the magnitude, what's the cost of that risk? Are they going to miss a test and not be able to take it up? Redo it? Are they going to miss the class that's a review for an exam? So first explaining the risk process, how we identify, how we prioritize, and then what comfort level we are with taking those risks. Because we can't control all risks, but we need to identify and look at those that have the highest cost to us, whether it be money, whether it be time, whether it be a grade, and then focus on that. And that's kind of our springboard before going into how do you keep your programs more secure, or how do you keep your data more private or secure at a particular organization or company that you're working for.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience?
We do have some questions. First, Ms. Nelsenberger mentioned DoD being averse to change. How are defense leaders thinking about IT risk management with respect to mission outcomes and the risks to mission created by inaction? What needs to change in DoD culture to address this?
I've definitely developed a couple of battle scars on this one, and I don't have all the right answers. I don't think we institutionally have all the right answers, or we would have already solved this. I think up with IT modernization and acquisition reform, RMF reform is probably the third longest standing business in the DoD, maybe. But what I have learned is that we actually have some processes that are inherently better that we can use to rapidly assess technology risk, and especially cyber risk related to technology. I'm a big fan of red teaming, automated CI/CD pipelines. I'm a big fan of, I was one of the original architects of the fast track ATO and the continuous ATO, which basically you bake the process in. By the time you develop your code and spit it to production, at that point you're ready to allow continuous monitoring to take the ball. With Fast Track, you are assessing via red team, which I'd much rather know where a 12-year-old can hack me and what I can do about it than if I'm looking at 900 items on a checklist. I personally am not sure how to prioritize that. That doesn't tell me what the threat is for that system. There's so much more that goes into it. So we have those mechanisms that we can use. We've proven multiple times that they work better. That's the good news. The bad news, and I'll tell you one more piece of good news. It is a heck of a lot easier to assess risk when you are in a little bit more of a standardized cloud environment. You have lots of continuous monitoring. You can see your data. There's just so much more that you can automate. The bad news is that's not what a lot of our enterprise looks like. So it is inherently more difficult to manage risk across many stovepipes. And it has also, I think one of the biggest lessons learned that we're going after right now is that the way that we assess risk is also very fragmented. And so if you have a great authorizing official, you have a great commander, and they use the new processes, you can move incredibly fast. You can get things fielded very quickly. If you don't, if you have a team that is probably only doing things in a much slower way, B, hasn't leveraged any automation in doing it, C, is probably overworked and has a really long queue and probably isn't even going to look at it for a while. Those are all things that in the DoD, largely, they are kind of at the edge. It's up to the program office to do. And so we're looking at a couple things, like how do we better train our authorizing officials? How do we allow choice in authorizing officials so that you can look at, when you're trying to do something where speed matters, how do you get in touch with a team that can very quickly assess risk in a way that I think actually does mitigate the risk of acting today versus relying on what we already have. Sometimes a Hail Mary is all you got. When there's 3 seconds left, you get one throw. There's only one thing that you can try. And so kind of knowing the difference. But most of the time we do have some time, and we have some good tools that we can use. We need more consistency in using them. At our scale And as bifurcated as we still are, despite actually having a lot of good progress toward being an enterprise, it is really hard to get that consistency. So that is the thing that we are working through now, is making sure that people know, again, you have these tools. The reciprocity conversation earlier is almost humorous at this point. So we had one particular platform where Aaron Weiss and I, Aaron Weiss, the Navy CIO, and I literally signed a memo saying, guys, you're going to share data. And it was the same environment, and we still had people that wanted to analyze it for 3 months until we were just like, all right, knock it off. So people really, really love their analysis. People really want to make sure that we're safe. That's awesome to a point. There is some point at which we have to say, okay, we've met this standard, let's move on, and the mission needs this.
Great points. The challenge that I have when we move beyond traditional IT, right? So I think much of what you're talking about are traditional IT networks. And we're used to dealing with risk in a certain way. When we start to move to our fire control networks, when we start to move to our ICS SCADA, when we start to move towards systems that in the past have only had to worry about the performance of the specific mission function, cost, schedule, and performance of delivering that specific mission function, what normally gets sub-optimized is cybersecurity. Why is that? Because many program managers often leave cybersecurity to the end. And so when we talk about improving risk management, we have to look at shifting the insertion to the left in the design itself before the system even gets built. And that's a challenge for many of our system designers today, because they design the system focused on the function. They go test the function. Okay, the function works. Now let's add cybersecurity. Oh, cybersecurity broke it. Well, I can't afford to redesign my system, so I'm going to keep moving forward. The mission's too important, right? And so when we talk about modernization, it's more than just modernizing our risk assessment process. We have to get to digital engineering. We have to get to mission-based systems engineering, right? MBSE. Because now we have a model that we can test virtually before we have spent any money in building the system, and that's where the money comes in. So when we talk about risk management, it's not just about the assessment process. We have to look at the entire ecosystem, and we have to figure out where do we put our money to best modernize things. MBSE is expensive up front, but once we get that consistently applied across DoD, now we are not only testing our systems, we are testing the systems of systems, that integration that we have not effectively done, and assess the security of. And so it's exciting, right? It's exciting, but being able to articulate the importance of it to the folks who make the money decisions on the acquisitions side is now part of our job as IT professionals. Why is MBSE so important? Why is the digital engineering environment so important? And that's where we've got to be able to put pen to paper and start to show cost-benefit analysis, which is not fun on the IT side, but guess what? Until we can start to convince the people making decisions about money, about why this is an opportunity and not a cost, we will continue to struggle because cybersecurity continues to be left to the last minute.
I thought of another piece of good news to share with you. And that is that actually I'm seeing a big shift in that culture, which I think is a really good thing. So a couple years ago, this room cared about cyber. A lot of other rooms really did not care at all. Cyber was something that it was in the way of the mission. In Silicon Valley, cyber, unless you were a cyber company, it was in the way of delivery. It was in the way of your go-to-market. It was in the way of so many things. Everyone has been burned. over the past few years. We've had very, very public breaches, both on the commercial side and on the government side. Everyone is awake. Most of industry is shifting left. A lot of government is shifting left, in at least in our modern programs. I mean, if the program's already there, you know, you're there. You know, it's a little bit more difficult to transform. But I am seeing people caring more about cyber. We have a lot of money coming into the portfolio in 24 because people care about cyber and common IT right now. We actually had the first time, I don't know if you know the CPG process, but there's a process that we go through to say, hey, do you have enough money in your budget as a service to meet all of the requirements that DoD CIO is putting out for cyber and IT? And this year is the first time that we've actually had DoD CIO come back to services and say, you didn't spend enough money on cyber and IT, and you're going to have to answer for it. Our secretary, through OI7 and throughout all of his OIs, has been saying, are we investing in cyber, as well as are we investing in IT and comm, and recognizing that all of these things are foundational for the future fight in terms of capabilities and in terms of resiliency and security. And so we have a long, long road to go. And I'm so glad that we have the people in this room, both on the government side and on the vendor side, to go through the journey. But that is something I've not seen before, is that level of understanding and that level of advocacy and this amount of money flowing into the palm. So little rose on the otherwise gloomy tale.
Actually, I'd like to add something on to that. And you're right. I think the notion of timing is important. It's the right time. You know, people are paying attention and all of that. To both of your points, often I talk about, I think, you know, mindset and changing paradigms is important. And what I feel like it's time for is, used to be that the DoD or the government was, you know, the most technologically advanced, and the government would build whatever they needed. They would design and engineer whatever they needed, to the point that they needed industry to kind of come in and sprinkle some stuff on the end. And I think we're past the point where that should be shifted. You know, the industry now can move faster and innovate and all of that. If the department lets industry build it first, and in a lot of cases the solutions are already there, they just need to be tweaked a little bit. Let industry build the solution to more of a final decision for the DoD. So 80% from industry, for example, and then DoD comes in with the 20%, because DoD is always going to have the domain expertise. It's always going to have the people that, you know, public servants who their hearts are in the mission and they're not in it for revenue. They're in it for, you know, all the you know, the being patriots and being public servants. But that shift, I think, has to happen, because the department, as well intentioned as it is, and as you know, the smart people that are all throughout it, just can't move that fast. So there's a lot of technology, and I know this now because I was in the DoD, spent 8 years consecutively in the Pentagon, and I actually didn't hate it. I kind of like that environment. I know, crazy. And but now on the industry side, I see it. It takes a lot of commitment to put products out there that are FIPS compliant and FedRAMP certified, and all the hoops that industry has to go through, and security is baked into the products. And you know, industry solutions today are just a lot different than they were 5-10 years ago. And I hope that this conversation, legislation, budget flowing, will all just shift the mindset of, where do we go first for a solution? And it really should be what's available from a commercial industry, and then tweak it on the end with the government. It's kind of heresy, but I think that's where we are. You know, it's just the government's going to spend money either way, and they're either going to spend it on the solutions that are robust and agile, or they're going to spend it just continuing to do the same slow processes. And yeah, I'm a patriot. I love the government, love DoD, but it's time for that mindset shift.
I think in the university and nonprofit sectors too, there's more dedication to having a more centralized risk management department or person, because it's very much siloed in different departments. So let's say if computer science wanted to create a new program, then our department and the school that we're in would go through a series of identifying risks, or using something like the SWOT analysis to figure out, is this worth it? How is it going to affect our accreditation? What kind of licensures or other things that we might have to do. Whereas if somebody in liberal arts wants to start a new program, it would be done in that area, that department, that school. So now I'm seeing most of the universities and schools looking at it as more of an enterprise-wide risk management initiative. So whether it is creating a new program or whether it is buying software that's going to help us monitor networking issues or student data or privacy, it's more of a centralized approach rather than individual people or departments or schools, as well as really documentation, really so that we can learn from our past mistakes as well as successes, having risk management software that we can look back at and use as a way to improve ourselves in the future.
So Mary, I would like to ask a question because today we are workforce today. However, we have to make sure that our next generation IT professionals understand cybersecurity and build and bake into that. So from academia perspective, can you share with us how that is being taught to the students that they have to consider cybersecurity as they're building or programming, even for a project, right? So can you answer that for us?
Yeah, with the schools I've been involved in, most all of them have industry advisory boards that we meet with once or twice a year to bring forth skills and things that they need for their future employees. And we kind of tap into cybersecurity concepts, even at the early classes in computer science, talking about it, maybe looking at, in the beginning programming classes, we might look at secure ways to program and Java or Python, very simplistic to begin with. And then as they advance in the degree, we get more involved in it. We have cybersecurity certificates that we encourage students to pursue along with their computer science degree and working on a computer science major. So that is, yeah, that's being looked at. That's not my particular area, but I'm part of the committee that really formulates what should be offered and marketing it to our students.
Do we have another question from audience?
We do, thank you. The next question, what is your biggest objective you have in your current role, and what is the risk or obstacle that you have to overcome to achieve this objective?
We got a lot of work to do.
So it's really interesting because while my background is in cybersecurity, my current job, the primary focus of which is Joint All-Domain Command and Control, not really focused on cybersecurity per se, right? So when we talk about the biggest objective we have in our current job, it's about secure data interoperability. And so, yes, I just brought cybersecurity into the discussion because as I sat through a few of the panels today and a few of the keynote speakers, we talk about data interoperability, but I really think we have to start adding secure at the beginning because I think they think it's implied, but when senior leaders don't say it out loud, then it usually doesn't happen. And so when I talk about secure data interoperability and I talk about joint all-domain command and control in a combined operation, right? So I'm going to say combined joint all-domain command and control. How do we do that? Well, today we've got a bunch of cross-domain solutions, we've got a bunch of stovepipe networks, and it's slow. It's slow in authorizations, it's slow in configuration, it's slow in maintenance and expensive, and our partners don't necessarily have the ability to secure their networks. So where do we go from there? Aaron Weiss, Jane Rathbun, so Department of Navy, Jane Rathbun, in her role, she said, hey, we just need to do away with cross-domain solutions. We can do this in Zero Trust. In my previous job, it was not something that I could embrace. In my current job, it absolutely is something that I can embrace because we have got to, if we do Zero Trust right, notice I say if we do it right, then I think eventually classification becomes a data label, which means eventually in a data-centric environment as opposed to a system-centric stovepipe, I will be able to share information with the appropriate folks at the time that they need it. What is it going to take to get there? Right now we're designing Zero Trust in the enterprise environment, which is great. We do need to secure our enterprise. What does Zero Trust look like in the tactical environment? What does it look like for a fire control system where decisions have to be made in milliseconds? I don't think that I'm going to have the time to do full Zero Trust authentication there. But, and this goes back to my statement up front, risk management has a temporal base. If I only have to protect the information for milliseconds to seconds, what are the minimum Zero Trust attributes that I need to ensure are common in that environment? And those are the discussions that we're having today. Every new initiative needs a name, right? And I couldn't really use Zero Trust because now everybody's saying, okay, all of Zero Trust is important. It took me a day and a half in my conference that I called for this to articulate to them it's not about all of Zero Trust attributes. What are the minimum that must be common? What are the ones that can be federated? Because what I care about in the tactical environment is slightly different than what I care about in the enterprise environment, where that information needs to stay secured for hours, weeks, years. It's an entirely different time horizon. And so we call it security interoperability in the tactical environment. I choose these words deliberately. Security interoperability, because I have got to be able to exchange data at tactically relevant speeds. Why do I say tactical environment and not tactical edge? Because every service means something different when they say tactical edge, and DISA means something else different when they say tactical edge. But I think we can all agree that there are certain characteristics that are common to the tactical environment that we must exchange data in. And so that's what we are defining as the warfighting requirement. For those in the audience not familiar with what the Joint Staff does, and I really wasn't before I showed up, it's about defining the joint warfighting requirements. And so I'm approaching Zero Trust from that perspective in order to make sure that as we instantiate JADC2, and there are multiple instantiations of JADC2 from the enterprise level all the way to the tactical environment, and each one of them looks different, that we do it in a way that delivers secure interoperability.
All right, so I guess I get to be a little bit funny and say that I did just publish a public strategy, so pretty much all of my objectives are on the web. But one of those kind of big moonshot objectives is for us to have one environment where we can fight together with our joint partners and our allies. And that's kind of like the big, where are we headed? Data from anywhere to anywhere, you know, great tagline in the Air Force and the Space Force, of course. You know, we are talking about satellites, we're talking about aerial networks, we're talking about ships, we're talking about land. Occasionally we talk to submarines, you know, less often from the Air Force. But in order to do that, there are a lot of things that we have to go through. There are allied relationships and some really funny policy things that go beyond the technology. In the technology, I would agree that zero trust is kind of the concept and the framework that gets us toward where we need to go. What is the risk? And I will share that I have never seen the department so aligned on anything as we are on zero trust, starting with identity as kind of the primary foundation that we have to get done in the very near term. So if we look at we said earlier, hey, we don't like to act on new things. I'd say we've kind of gotten over it on zero trust. We still have to execute. We still have to prove it to everyone, including ourselves, that we can execute this big, bold mission. But as we go through and do that, what is the risk of failing? What is the risk of not making these changes? Well, in identity, we'll have 10 different identities. We'll still be logging into a bunch of different systems in different ways. We won't be able to handshake across environments. We will still have known cyber vulnerabilities that we have not mitigated. If we aren't able to rapidly adopt SD-WAN solutions, we're going to have, and new gateways, we're going to continue to have the network performance that we have today. These are all of the things that we have to look forward. And a lot of the things that I think that we identify as risks, honestly, it comes down to not, hey, I can't do that because there's this risk. It's, hey, how do we mitigate that? And it usually means that we have to look outside our walls to industry and say, hey, you have done this before. It's not your first rodeo. How did you mitigate this? How do you look at a cloud application and determine if you want to bring it into your environment? How do you test whether that comm link is going to be secure enough in this environment? So really with my objectives, it really comes down to understanding and mitigating the risk and trying to move faster without being reckless, and trying to fix the processes as we go, because fortunately or unfortunately, we are a hero culture, and I love our heroes, and I love that people want to knock themselves out for the mission, but we shouldn't be excited when the same hero has to go down the same path every single time. So that's one of the things that I'm looking at is once we learn, how do we clear that path for the next folks?
Yeah, I think mitigating risks at a university or commercial company, I mean, there's many ways to do that. I mean, there is cyber liability insurance, but that's not necessarily the first line of defense, right? There has to be policies, training, ongoing training to faculty, students, staff, employees on how to keep information safe, how to keep data safe. And then there has to be policies. So many of the universities I've worked with have ongoing training. There's a couple industry folks, let's see, it's KNOWB, and it helps the employees at that, at whatever level they're in, understand things that they could do to keep their personal effects safe, but also devices, data. Then there's, of course, policies that are set by universities that help remind people about what they can do and what they can't do, what they can post on social media, what they can't post on social media. So I think there's a wide variety of ways to mitigate these risks. Certainly there's the insurance route for many things. I mean, everybody has fire insurance, right? If your house burns down, you don't want to have to, cover that, your own cost. But it's not necessarily the first line of defense when you're talking about risks within a business, especially in the data arena. So the ongoing training and ongoing awareness from the top down, right? It's not just something one department deals with or the administration deals with, but it should be at all levels.
I think the question was, what's your objective? What's our objective and our role, and what's the biggest challenge? Speaking from Splunk's objective, our tagline, if you want to call it that, is to help turn data into doing. And that's kind of aligned exactly with the theme of this event. And that's just, we all have mountains of data, right? We all have, the department does, we as individuals do, you and your family, your company. There's so much data floating around out there that we can't even grasp where it is, how important it is, what we're going to do with it. So, so Splunk's objective is to help make use of that. But just in general for any technology company, and if I could just speak broadly, I think our biggest, whatever you're selling or whatever your core capability is, selling to the government, back to the question was, what's the biggest challenge? That big challenge is getting the mindset shift. People talk about, we talk about data, we talk about let's not be systems focused, but let's be data focused. But when we really talk to our government customers about how they interpret that, there's not an understanding of what that actually means. It means just letting go of control of all the different systems and applications in the environment and listening to the underlying data and let it flow into a platform that can then make it useful. Because when you let the data do the talking or data do the work, data doesn't have agendas. It doesn't have long-term memories about the guy that you couldn't stand in your office 10 years ago that now he works for a vendor and you don't like him. Data doesn't have memories and emotions about this is my system and I can't let them turn it off because I've been doing this for 20 years. It takes a lot of the human emotion and the things that get in the way of us making good decisions and just lets people do things in a smart way. Just think about your smartphone. How much easier it is to manage your banking on your smartphone as opposed to manually, using your checkbook and figuring out what the balance is in your check. We manage our lives leveraging data through cloud-based technology and smartphones and computers, and that should be the same mindset for the government. It should be let the data kind of guide you and direct you, and trust that it's more secure today than it used to be, because it has to be. We face risk, there's litigation exposure, we have to make sure that our products and services are secure and they're certified to meet the government standards. Trust that, and then let those products guide you to what to do with all those mountains of data. That's a huge challenge. But back to Lauren's example of there's bad news and there's good news. The good news is that there's more leaders today talking about this openly and making themselves available to have conversations than there were, 5-10 years ago. So it's good news. We need to keep doing it. And following the data is going to help us move into a modern future. And without the data, we're just not going to get there.
I really hope someone was taking notes as you were rattling off the data is and data isn't. That was very poetic and very, very amusing. I might repeat that.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, the next question. What are some best practices or lessons learned for making risk management part of your culture versus just a checklist of controls?
So I think I already shared all of our best practices and sins on this one. So get the processes right, communicate it, and then when you realize that even good processes aren't being used 90% of the time to kill the checklist, that's when I start looking at training and maybe looking at how we redraw our AO boundaries and empower commanders and see what other tools to make sure that the message goes throughout the enterprise so that we are using the tools that we need. And I'll just share that, I'll just reiterate that, we've proven multiple times that there are ways to either automate the checklist or just assess risk in a different way for the vast majority of our new technology. And so I'm going to keep beating that drum and work the retraining mission too until we can get up to that, 90% of the time people are not scared entering the process and can just get things to market.
So I'd like to build on that. We've talked about culture, we've talked about people. I think one of the best practices or lessons learned are senior leaders or leaders need to learn how to ask the right questions. And how do you do that? Well, you have to make time to care and start to probe some underlying assumptions, because I guarantee you in every decision that is made, there are assumptions that are not being clearly articulated, and they matter when you're making risk decisions. And so make time for the conversation with the person who's making the recommendation to you as the senior leader, because at the end of the day, it goes back to risk tolerance. Many of the security professionals, whether they're physical security, IT security, personnel security, many of those folks believe it's their job to reduce risk to zero. And they're actually removing your decision space. That's not acceptable today, because many times it's standing in the way of speed, is standing in the way of progress. And so ask the questions, understand the data. If you're responsible for authorizations and they are taking you more than a year, more than 2 years, more than 3 years, there's some questions to ask of the folks doing the job, because odds are their risk tolerance is much lower than yours. And so take the time to ask for the data, have the discussions, help your team understand what your risk tolerance is, and then you can have, I think, some improved risk management, agility, and speed.
Yeah, I think frameworks, whether they be risk management frameworks or control frameworks, they're helpful. They can be very helpful, but if we don't have open communication about risks and what we're willing to handle at a organizational level, it's going to be kind of siloed again. It's going to be only the upper management looking at risks and analyzing it and prioritizing it, and not at the various levels that are critical. Those people might be the ones that are doing the day-to-day operations that need to be a part of that discussion. So frameworks are nice, and best practices and things that we kind of go by, those are good, but it's just one tool of many that I think needs to be employed when we deal with risk management.
I think a best practice here, just like it is for much of the military, is going back to the basics of leadership and walking around. Leadership by walking around, we used to call it, you know, as officers going around the ship or going around the squadron, talking to sailors, talking to airmen, soldiers, because often they have the best solutions to things, because they're the ones whose hands are on the equipment, who are dealing with whatever tool or program that their senior leadership has given them, and they're going to find a way to get the work done, regardless of whatever the rules are in place. And I think that there isn't enough of crowdsourcing ideas from junior people, whether it's risk management with technology or just making do with the resources that you have. There's a book out right now that it's really hot now. A lot of people are reading it. It's called Hack Your Bureaucracy. And it's about, there's some good things that come out of bureaucracy. And some of them are like, let's find small tweaks that we can make in the environment to make a bureaucracy be more efficient. And I think when you start asking people whose hands are on the equipment, and that includes keyboards and, you know, servers and all of that, what small tweaks could leaders make to help them manage the risk that they have to manage without trying to get to zero risk or draw the risk down to zero? We might get some more creative solutions out there. And I think somewhere along the way, that notion of asking junior people their thoughts has we've kind of forgotten that as an organization. And maybe I don't know how you do it. There's a lot of young folks out there across the DoD, but you know, I think it's time to go back to the end users and ask what their thoughts are. Maybe they can help us out.
I will share that all of my best mentors are captains and chiefs.
So we are gaining a lot of insight from the distinguished panel members, but we can talk about it. But just the director always talks about velocity of action. And so one question that I would like to ask is, as we talk about risk management, which enables our mission execution, before the next TechNet, what would you like to see from the government current workforce as well as industry in terms of what they should consider achieving or being able to answer within the next year?
This is really aggressive, but we're going to go for it. I've got two wish lists. I'll rub the lamp. And these are things that we're working out on the strategy, but a year's probably maybe bullish. So one is to get to one NOC, SOC, and GOC so that we can consistently and immediately tell the difference between the bulldozer, the Chinese cyber attack, and the blue on blue between multiple DoD entities just making a change at the same time. That's important. That's actually a really big deal, because we are a globally distributed operation. We've been used to operating in our stovepipes. We still fix things in our stovepipes. That's good and that's bad. There are pros and cons. But being able to get to that common operating model and to be able to have 24/7 ops with that level of visibility, that is one. The second one is, I've talked about how we've tried different processes that for software development in-house scale pretty easily because it's an automated process. Any other time that we have a human making a cybersecurity accreditation decision in a queue of things across an enterprise this large, like no matter how well we automate different parts of it, or even redrawing boundaries and training AOs, it's only going to go so far. I would like to completely turn it on its head and just get to the point, and we're making some investments along this way. How do we get to the point where we have properly invested in the infrastructure, the sensoring, the data, to feed that broader picture, where we can completely rely on our site picture to make those risk decisions, where we can, and we're working on an effort right now called Race to the Cloud with our major cloud service providers. And with that, how do we just rely on our cloud service providers who have already gone through the accreditation process and who have already worked with us for years on enterprise identity services, on continuous monitoring? We're defending about 500,000 threats per month in an automated manner through the things that we've put in place. How do we get to the point where we can use a completely automated process to spit things out? We don't have an AO making a manual decision at a point in time on its way into a cloud environment that we've spent that much time on. And so, just going through and making sure that we are kind of following the thread and thinking about things in a completely different manner. I would love, this is something that I will be pulling together an industry roundtable on in the near future, is how can we inherently take a different approach where we're not going through and independently accrediting systems. If you are leveraging any type of cloud-based environment, that we can go with the speed of light.
I'll go a little aggressive too, and mine is about up-leveling the data literacy, I'll say, making everyone smarter about data. And as it pertains to the DoD, what I would like to see is that every service in their initial training pipeline, in their boot camp for enlisted and their officer training pipelines for the officer side, incorporate basics about cybersecurity hygiene, responsibility of managing data into that initial training. I can speak for Navy boot camp. They're still teaching sailors to, do manual rifle maneuvers and march and all of those things that have zero relevance in the actual United States Navy. And so perhaps it's time to start incorporating training that people really need, which is about technology and about data and responsibility. Because to your point, Admiral, about you can't bake security into the end of a product or something that you're developing. You can't bake awareness of technology into a captain or a chief petty officer if they are only hearing about it for the first time, 10 years into their career. And I think the department can do it. So that's what I would like to see by next year.
And to kind of piggyback on that, education's the key. Of course, it's going to come from me. But I do think educating in all different levels, the need to secure data, to secure devices, I think people, you know, they don't know what they don't know, so we need to train them on proper procedures. And I know a lot of that's being done already, but there's still instances happening that because somebody shared data with somebody else or their credentials, that there was a data breach or there was a network intruder. So I think more education at different levels, and there's so many, computer-based training. There's so many different ways that we can approach training these days. So I think being more creative in that so that people aren't necessarily going to a class, sitting and listening to somebody, but they're actually engaged in the learning process.
DoD does really awesome cybersecurity training. You guys know this, right?
That was sarcasm.
Actually, it is getting better. But I was very entertained by. Do you guys know Jeff and Tina? Oh yeah, Tina. Okay, all right. Jeff and Tina, they were back on LinkedIn this past week. Chief Bass posted the Jeff Halloween costume, full with smug expression and blue sweater. So we've moved on, but we still have some things that we can learn.
And so what I'd like to see in a year and 2 years, and I'm going to break it up that way because what I want is audacious. Over the next year, I want to demonstrate, experiment, prove out what the minimum zero trust attributes are that we need in our tactical environment. That's over the next year. In 2 years, we have something called Bold Quest 24 that's going to be held in conjunction with Valiant Shield down in Australia. And my goal by then is to figure out which zero trust attributes we can have in place to perhaps remove the cross-domain solutions between US SIPRNet and our coalition. We'll start with Five Eyes, with our Five Eyes SecRel networks. That's the audacious goal that I think DoD needs to get to sooner rather than later. But ideally, if we can do it sooner than 2 years, but I think we have some policy barriers to work through. So that's what I'd like to see.
So now you have all heard what is required of you from the senior cyber leaders. So let's go and do great things. But before we do that, round of applause for the distinguished panel members. Sorry with that last question.
Thank you so much. I'd like to again thank our moderator and panelists for that excellent discussion. As a token of appreciation, Women in AFCEA will make a donation on behalf of each panelist to Girls Who Code, a nonprofit organization that values diversity, equity, and inclusion as essential to its mission to helping inspire, educate, and equip girls with computing skills to become change agents in their communities. We also have a challenge coin from this 37th TechNet Indo-Pacific Conference for you. So for our audience, before you leave, please remember to scan your badge to qualify for the continuing education credits. The scanner automatically shuts off in 15 minutes. At the end of this session, you will not be able to scan it later, so please make sure you do that in the back. We look forward to seeing you at the Women in AFCEA reception immediately following this panel. Don't forget to pick up your drink tickets. I believe Halia has them in the back. Yep. So find Halia to get your drink tickets. The reception is sponsored by Sienna and Increditech, so thank you again for your sponsorship and support. And thank you again. Enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.
Thank you for attending today's sessions. As a final reminder, somebody has turned in a phone here at the AV table, so if you have misplaced your phone, come see us here.